Example, transform the Laplace's equation del square u equals to 0 into the spherical polar coordinates. Solution, let x equals to r sine of theta cos of phi, y equals to r sine of theta sine of phi, z equals to r cos of theta, so which implies r square equals to x square plus y square plus z square in spherical polar coordinates. U equals to u r theta phi, and theta equals to tangent inverse square root of x square plus y square upon z, and phi equals to tangent inverse y upon x. Now theta x equals to partial derivative of theta with respect to x. Solving, we have the value of cos of theta cos of phi upon r. Similarly, theta y equals to partial derivative of theta with respect to y. Value is cos of theta sin phi upon r, and theta z's value partial derivative of theta with respect to z equals to minus sin theta upon r. Thus we have theta x equals to cos of theta cos of phi upon r, theta y equals to cos of theta sin phi upon r, and theta z equals to minus sin theta upon r. Similarly, phi x we will partial derivative with respect to x equals to minus sin phi upon r sin theta, and phi y equals to partial derivative of phi with respect to y equals to cos of phi upon r sin of theta, and phi z equals to partial derivative of phi with respect to z equals to 0. Now ux equals to rx ur rx plus u theta theta x plus u phi x, which is after the solving we have value ur sin theta cos of phi plus u theta cos of phi upon r minus u phi sin of phi upon r sin of theta. Similarly, uy equals to, its value equals to ur sin theta sin of phi plus u theta cos of theta sin of phi upon r plus u of phi cos of phi upon r sin of theta, and similarly uz equal values equals to ur cos of theta minus u theta sin of theta upon r. Now the second part of the question. For the second order derivatives, we have uxx uxr rx plus ux theta theta x plus ux phi x equals to ux value ur sin theta cos of phi plus u theta cos of phi upon r minus u phi sin of phi upon r sin of theta. This term's partial derivative with respect to r into rx value sin theta cos of phi plus again ux, so same value of this ux we will put ur sin theta cos of phi plus u theta cos of phi upon r minus u phi sin of phi upon r sin of theta, and this whole terms ux partial derivative with respect to theta into theta x value is cos of theta cos of phi upon r plus again ux partial derivative with respect to phi. So again putting the ux value same as it is ur sin theta cos of phi plus u theta cos of phi upon r minus u of phi sin of phi upon r sin of theta, and this whole terms partial derivative with respect to phi into phi x value minus sin phi upon r sin of theta, so equals to urr sin theta cos of phi plus ur into 0 plus ur theta cos of phi upon r plus u theta cos of phi into minus 1 upon r square minus ur phi into sin phi upon r sin theta minus u phi into sin phi upon sin theta into minus 1 upon r square, and whole term equals to minus sin theta cos of phi plus ur theta sin theta cos of phi plus ur cos of phi plus u theta theta cos of phi upon r plus u of theta into minus sin theta upon r into cos of phi minus u theta phi sin of phi upon r sin theta minus u phi into sin phi upon r into minus 1 upon sin square theta into cos of theta whole term into cos of theta cos of phi upon r plus ur phi into sin theta cos of phi plus ur sin theta into minus sin phi plus u phi theta into cos of phi upon r plus u theta into cos of theta upon r into minus sin phi minus u phi into sin of phi upon r sin of theta minus u phi upon r sin of theta into cos of phi and whole term into minus sin phi upon r sin of theta. So in this is equals to ur sin square theta cos square phi plus ur theta sin of theta cos square phi upon r minus 1 upon r square u theta sin theta cos square phi minus 1 upon r ur phi sin of phi cos of phi plus 1 upon r square u phi sin of phi cos of phi plus 1 upon r into ur theta sin of theta cos square phi plus 1 upon r ur cos square phi plus 1 upon r square u theta cos square phi minus 1 upon r square u theta sin of theta cos square phi plus 1 upon r square u phi sin of phi cos square theta upon sin square theta minus 1 upon r ur phi sin phi cos of phi minus 1 upon r square u phi theta cos of theta sin of phi cos of phi upon sin of theta plus ur sin square phi upon r plus 1 upon r square u theta sin square phi cos of theta upon sin theta plus 1 upon r square u phi sin square phi upon sin square theta plus 1 upon r square u phi sin of phi cos of phi upon sin square theta equals to sin square theta cos square phi into whole into ur plus cos square theta cos square phi upon r square into u theta plus sin square phi upon r square into sin square theta u phi plus ur theta into 2 sin theta cos of theta cos square phi upon r plus ur phi into minus 2 sin phi cos phi upon r plus u theta phi into minus 2 cos of theta cos of phi sin of phi upon r square sin of theta plus ur into cos square theta cos square phi upon r plus sin square phi upon r plus u phi into sin of phi cos of phi upon r square plus cos square theta cos of phi sin phi upon r square sin square theta plus sin of phi cos of phi upon r square sin square theta plus u of theta into cos of theta sin square phi upon r square sin of theta minus 2 cos of theta sin of theta cos square phi upon r square. This is equation 1. The next part of the question we will do the third part of the video.